Welcome everybody again. Nadine from Osbiz here. It's great to be here with you as we continue through this afternoon session of the NRW Communications Virtual Investor Conference. And we have CleanTeQ Water up for you next. It's an ASX listed company. And just a reminder before we get into it that you can ask questions and you can do so via the button that's available on your screen. And we'll get to them at the end of the session. CleanTeQ Water, let's get back to it, provides metals recovery and water treatment solutions for governments and companies. It offers technology solutions in the areas of ionic filtration, membrane-free desalination, chemical-free recovery reverse osmosis, encapsulated bacteria lenses, complete nutrient removal, low energy evaporation, if that's not enough, metal recovery, as well as membranes for filtration of waters and wastewaters. So it does a lot. The company also undertakes turnkey projects such as metals recovery and water treatment plants. It serves municipal wastewater, surface water, industrial wastewater, and mining process water sectors. So we will welcome now Willem Vrussendorf to tell us all about the company. He's the CEO. Welcome, Willem.
Thank you, Nadine. So I'm glad to talk here at today's conference. Let me quickly run you through the company and hopefully clarify a bit all these terms about the various technologies that we are selling. So just a quick summary to start with. So CleanTeQ Water indeed traded under CNQ. Our share price is currently around $1. So what happened is that we used to be CleanTeQ as a whole. We recently demerged from Sunrise Energy Metals, really on the back of our first large-scale plants that we installed successfully. And that's now the basis for growth. And that meant that being a separate company is makes more sense for us and for the shareholders than being integrated as we used to. So we have, after these first installed contracts, have gotten a number of new contracts, working on a lot of other contracts around the world. And we're also close to launching a new graphene membrane, which in itself could be a very substantial development for our company. We have a strong board and a management team, so we're very much preparing for this growth for the years to come. Our markets. So three major markets we focus on. One is industrial brine treatment, the other one is municipal reuse, and the third one is mining. So each of these markets is very substantial. So if you sell integrated equipment to those companies, to those markets, to companies within those markets, the total market size on an annual basis is multiple tens of billions of dollars. And each of these sectors has a certain amount of substantial challenges. And that's also where we as a company focus on. We don't focus on the more commoditized steps in water treatment plants. We focus on the more advanced water treatment. So you very much see that in the first sector, industrial brine treatment. So what you have is basically every site around the world has industrial treatment. And what you often see there is that the brine is the problem. So you have certain steps that are relatively straightforward. What they do is separate the pollution from the water. And then that pollution ends up in a more concentrated stream that you typically call brines, or those are brines. And then, especially over the last decade, say, these brines become an increasingly large problem because they're also substantial volumes and they tend to include all the pollutants, including a few that you really don't want to put back into the environment, such as nitrate or ammonia. So we have technology solutions to address that. The second one, municipal reuse. Again, in municipal sites, there's always water treatment. That tends to be relatively straightforward, but still creates a relatively clean stream of water. So what's happening right now around the world is that people looking at that water and say, instead of putting it into the river or the sea, we should reuse that, because it's really a waste not to try to reuse that and so reduce the water usage of those municipalities. And finally, mining, that's really where we come from. So our portfolio of solutions is quite focused or quite suitable for the various challenges that exist in mine sites. And those challenges are substantial. So you have brines there as well, you have metals, you have acid, you have a lot of problems that provide substantial opportunities for us, but obviously big challenges for the mine. So a few more sort of introduction on the markets we focus on. So nitrate removal is specifically an interesting problem for us and a real problem in the world these days for especially market 1 and 2 I mentioned. So that's for the brines that are created at industrial sites, and that's also for municipal effluent. So what has happened over the last decade or so, mostly because of fertilizer use in agriculture, is that the underlying nitrate and ammonia concentration in groundwater, but also in rivers and all kinds of natural waters has increased. So that's creating problem in itself. So if algae blooms and all kinds of other things. At the same time, the concerns about what nitrates does to our health has also increased. So you get this perfect storm of increasing background concentrations and increasing concerns. And that's a market that is now really coming up and creating substantial challenges for the standard technology. So we have 2 solutions for this, specifically focused on nitrate removal, that can address those new challenges that have emerged because of these increased nitrate concentrations. And those markets exist around the world, really, including Australia, New Zealand, but also very much including North America and China, where these nitrate concentrations are really causing issues. The second one, I already mentioned this, the municipal effluent market. What you see is some countries do this really well already. So one is Israel, the other one is Singapore. It's probably already higher than you see in this picture, higher than 70%. But the rest of the world is really not using this resource the way it should. And it's generally considered by most experts the cheapest source of substantial amounts of additional water in the world. So it's much cheaper, for example, than desalination of seawater. That's something that therefore we have developed solutions for. So one of them is HYROX, high recovery reverse osmosis, which allows us to take that effluent, upgrade it such that it can be reused, for example, in industry or agriculture, and potentially even for drinking at a most economical way. Then mining, I already mentioned that. I think it doesn't require much further introduction for most, especially for Australian shareholders. I think that mining is often limited by water. It's a big headache for many of those sites, what to do when you have too much water, especially when it ends up in tailings dams or in evaporation ponds. And also obviously what to do when you don't have enough water, because then you really need to recycle the maximum amount that you create. So again, our solutions are very geared towards the mining sector. So we are profiting from this trend that exists at the moment around the world for mining companies to be more responsible about their recycling, and also governments to crack down on any of the risks that exist. And finally, consumers that are also requiring the apples of this world to source from sustainable mines. So that brings me back to the company in a way. So what we do is provide integrated water treatment solutions. And you see on top a number of the plants that we've built. And each of those plants includes one of our core technologies. So they're all including our patents and IP that we've developed and that we've now installed in these large sites. So within that company, so within that context, I should point out 3 areas of specific expertise or specific technologies, and that's on the bottom of this slide. So on the left lower corner, you see metal recovery. Some of the world preeminent experts on how to use resin exchange for metal recovery exists in our company. So they used to also be part of this bigger company, including the flow sheet that we've developed together with Sunrise, so Sunrise Energy Metals, from which we now separated, but that expertise is still very much there. A second important area for which I will have a separate slide later is our membranes, or RR membranes. So we have developed a whole new membrane based on graphene, and that's been for almost a decade now recognized to be a potential substantial improvement to existing membranes. And we are very close to introducing that to the market. And then thirdly, we have encapsulated bacteria, which we call BioCleanse. We right now already use and install them in our larger integrated plants that is, so large scale equipment. We also see this as a separate development that we can sell to other parties, to OEMs and agents, etc., to use in other water treatment plants that we didn't build ourselves. So this is a separate product that we can also as a consumable sell into the water market. Our reach then, so we're an Australian company with our head office in Melbourne. and we also have an office in Beijing, and we have a production facility in Tianjin for our BioCleanse, the product I just mentioned. And we've installed a number of projects around the world. We're installing some of those still. We have a number of partnerships, but two to point out specifically on this slide are worth mentioning. One is TeQ, so that's the partner with whom we are doing our Oman project. So we've already built a plant there. We're working on the upgrade or expansion actually. And then a second one is a project we have in the DRC that we also are doing together with TeQ. And then Nesser is a newer partnership for the oil and gas sector, also very focused on these brines that are a problem there. And oil and gas is under a lot of pressure these days, probably almost more than any other sector, to reduce their environmental footprint. That very much includes water. So we're very focused on the Middle East there, which could be a very substantial market in the future, and very suitable again for our technology solutions. I won't go into detail here. You can see it on the website as well as who our management and our board are. I think it's worth mentioning perhaps our two major shareholders that used to be the shareholders of CleanTeQ, that are a little bit more mining focused by background, but are very committed to our business as well. And in fact, Robert Friedland's initial investment in CleanTeQ a while ago was because of the environmental protection angle of it, more than the mining angle. So we've since separated, but he's still very committed and supportive of the company. Then our solutions, so these were mentioned at the start by Nadine. These are the solutions we're promoting at the moment. So they are mature, and some of them are implemented already in a large scale. So each of them brings something different from what's there. And we developed them with the purpose of addressing some of the challenges we see in the water market. The water market is very large, very diverse, but you can clearly see a number of problems. And one of them is, for example, membrane fouling. Another one is the brines I mentioned before. And that's why we developed these solutions. And we're intentionally having a portfolio. And that's because, as many of you will know, the water treatment is hardly ever a cookie cutter approach. It's hardly ever one solution you provide and that solves all their problems. It's almost always a flow sheet. And we tend not to be at the simple part of the flow sheets, but even in the more advanced treatment steps, you tend to have multiple technologies, or two at least in many of the cases. And then customers are also looking for a supplier that can help them with a holistic solution. So we provide all that, and that's where our portfolio approach came from, and very much something we believe in and we continue to develop. It's also very effective of making sure you continue to be able to grow and continue to be able to react to new developments. Because although water treatment is obviously quite old in a way, it's been around for a long time, the developments are quite substantial recently. So it's both the climate change angle that has caused governments to be stricter, but you also see a continuous change in concern. So you see more and more micropollutants, as they call it, to become more prominent in the eyes of the government and people to be concerned about that, which then leads to new treatment or new demand for new treatment methods. Nitrate is an example of this, actually. And also you have these persistent organics problems that now come up. So we make sure that in our solutions portfolio, we continue to be ready for the biggest problems and the biggest challenges that exist at the moment in the water sector. I won't go into each of those solutions in detail, but one thing that is worth emphasizing is Resin Exchange. This is the technology that's the underlying foundation of many of our solutions. And this is something, we call it continuous ion exchange, that was adopted out of mining, actually. And it's been used for a long time in the Soviet Union, mostly in the mining sector. So there they use it to take out, for example, uranium and gold. And CleanTeQ has adopted that for water treatment. And Resin Exchange is in itself an attractive technology, because what you can do with Resin Exchange is very selectively remove certain pollutants. And that's a benefit compared to another advanced way of treating things, which is membranes. So membranes are great, but they take out everything. And although that sounds good, what you then create is, again, this secondary pollution, so brines, that includes all the pollutants that were in the water. So both the effluent water is cleaner than it needs to be. Sometimes that's literal, so sometimes you need to add back certain salts into the water to create it to the specifications that you want to have. But also the pollution you create through membranes then includes everything. So it tends to be much larger volume and harder to do anything with. Whereas with resin exchange, you can very selectively only take out the pollutants that are harmful, or when it considers mining or metals, you can only take out those pollutants or impurities that are valuable. And in both cases, that creates a lot of benefits. So for us, it always made a lot of sense to not only use this in mining, but also use it in water treatment. So the other thing that's worth emphasizing is what I mentioned at the start is our new membrane, a graphene membrane that has been under development for multiple decades now. And we have sort of accelerated that development over the last 5 years. So we now feel we're ready for introduction, or very soon to be ready for introduction. We've done the test internally, and we're very happy with those. So we're now looking to show the first field test. And as some of you might know who really follow the water sector, it's been quite exciting in the membrane space recently in water, with some companies, especially in Europe, that have created a number of new membranes, and a lot of interest is there again from the larger companies and from customers to have better membranes. And as I mentioned before, I think there's two challenges with membranes at the moment, besides the challenge that you take out all the pollutions at once. And one of those is the energy use. It is energy intensive, and that's a problem. And the second one is fouling. So because it's basically a barrier, any pollutants that sort of stick to the surface cause issues in membrane treatment. And in both cases, graphene membranes can be far superior to the existing membranes. So they would have much lower energy use, and it would also be much easier to be used in waters that have fouling risk. So back to the solutions we already promote and sell. So here are 6 examples, and they show, I think, a good overview of the type of projects we're doing, the type of sizes we have, the type of geographies we're focused on. And they're all related to the 3 sectors I mentioned at the start that we focus on. And again, they all have our proprietary technology in there. Maybe one extra remark, because we sometimes get, or regularly get, question on the Townsville project. It's a tender we won. We've done detailed design. We've ordered long lead items. Right now, we're in a continued contact with the council about the actual much larger EPC project that will follow. And that's mostly related to simply detailing the final design. So we did an initial design based on the specifications at the time, but the world has changed a bit. So we're working on making those designs final. And then finally, so I hope through my presentation, this became roughly clear, but just to summarize our high-level strategy, one is we're very much built around our core technologies. So our core technologies allow us to enter new market. It allows us to grow. It allows us to make good margins. Secondly, we're very focused on the sectors that we see most growth in and that have the best fit with our solutions. And that's anywhere in the world, right? So we're not limited by geography there. And then thirdly, on our business model, I mentioned that a little bit less. So right now we're very much a integrated technology solution business. So we sell these integrated plans. With that comes consumables. So we have an ongoing revenue stream after we sold it, because the resins that we tend to include in our solutions are a consumable. So there's an annual revenue from that. And also the BioCleanse that I mentioned would be a consumable. And then finally, there's a certain way of doing things in water treatment that's gaining popularity in some areas, which is BOOT. So you build the plant yourself and then you rent it out, or you sell water as a service, as they sometimes call it. And in places like the US, that's particularly becoming popular. That's certainly something we're aiming to do as well. It logically follows from the stage we're in currently, where you get the plants installed around the world. And then as a next step for the customers where that's suitable for and who are interested in it, you could then build the plant yourself and then sell the water subsequently under a 20 or 25-year agreement. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you. Thanks everybody for your attention.
And thank you. Could you just flesh out a little bit what hurdles Cleantech has to clear before they, potentially roll out that BOOT model that you were just speaking of?
Yeah, so what you tend to have, what's Moat is most attractive. One is obviously when your counterparty has good credit rating, etc. Right? You don't want to get into any issues there. But secondly, you tend to put debt in there, so you tend to raise external financing. And for banks or other people that provide that, they like to look at the number of plants in operation in the region and preferably the sector. So it is, with us now having a couple of plants in operation, that still means that you can really only install it smoothly when it's in a similar region and a similar sector. So once we are much bigger, so for example, if the Townsville project is running, then it's a much more logical next step to say for another large council in Australia or in New Zealand to say, okay, if you're interested in Moat, we can offer that, and then banks would be very keen to fund that as well.
And on the consumables, is there, I mean, are they completely locked into buying those particular consumables from CleanTeQ?
No, we don't do that, but they are well advised to keep buying from us. So we tend to provide we tend to provide long guarantees, and we do try to make sure that they're happy with us. So then it's very logical for them as well to work with us over the long term. But they're not completely locked in. And no, we provide some flexibility there to avoid that, because customers don't like to be locked in. But you tend to have good cooperation afterwards, and if things go well, they would like to work with you ongoing.
Customer service. It still comes down to customer service, doesn't it? When it comes to margins, do the margins greatly differ from geography to geography, country to country, potentially?
A little bit, but not greatly, I would say. If you want to compare it to margin, you would really want to look at advanced equipment. So we're not in, sometimes we call our sites EPC sites because they look like EPC, but it's really advanced and IP equipment we're selling. So it's much more these margins. And what you see is we have more margin pressure in a place like China. Mm-hmm. So there's some difference, I would say, but for the rest of the world, it's much more similar, these margins. And then you're much more looking at who are we competing with. So sometimes we really have something so unique that our margins are very healthy. Sometimes we move a little bit more to areas where there's more competition, and then our margins are under more pressure.
And is there a lot of competition in the space? I mean, I know you fleshed it out in your presentation, but is there a moat around CleanTeQ, or is this a territory grab essentially?
I would say in certain sectors, there's certainly a moat around CleanTeQ. It's never absolute, but in certain, we've seen examples where we're like 30% cheaper or 40% cheaper than any of the competition. With water is such that ultimately, if you throw enough money at it, you can do anything, but that can become prohibitively expensive. So that's what I would say there. But I think typically we are in sectors where we have a very competitive composition. So as you call it, it's maybe more territory grab. And it's often, we're often more limited by just the fact that customers would like to see pilots, would like to see smaller plants. So it's more on the customer side that you just have to go through that growth phase, than that it's really on the competition side that we're one-to-one against all kinds of competition and therefore are not growing fast.
And is it preferable to CleanTeQ? Does it make a difference whether it's municipalities or councils that you're working with versus corporates and private companies?
These are different sectors. So I cannot say it's both sectors we focus on. Yeah. They both have benefits. I think it's the difficulty with municipalities is often budget limitations. So they have budget cycles that can be slow. Mm-hmm. And decision-making can anyway be a little bit slower on average. But there are exceptions on both sides. There's some industrial companies that also take years to decide. Mm-hmm. But on average, they're quicker, right? Sometimes you get it in a few months. You never have that with a municipality.
Yeah. And what has life been like as a singularly listed company so far?
Good so far. I'm very new, so I guess you would want to ask me that a year later again. But so far, so good. We've been operating as a separate company for quite a while, and that helped. So it was, in that sense, a fairly smooth transition.
And where are the real challenges now you see, either in the broader macroeconomic cycle or in something that's very specific to CleanTeQ in the short to medium term?
I would say more what's specific to clean tech, and it's the growth cycle that just takes time, right? So we've only, I mentioned that in earlier presentation, we've only a little over a year ago started to build our commercial team. And now we're working on a lot of pilots, and these things all have to find their way through decision change and through customers. And then secondly, I mentioned the US where we want to go. That's a real period you have to go through, right? You want to start with a pilot, you probably need a partner, then you have a larger plant, and then it really starts to grow. And we now see from the plants we are operating, they're creating a lot of follow-up demand. But that's, I think, the sort of the time you need to get established in markets is the biggest hurdle right now to grow even faster. But that doesn't mean I'm not optimistic about our growth going forward.
Well, you can be optimistic, but do you have a rough timeline for when you could see significant progress in the US?
Oh, for the US specifically, no, I don't want to give a timeline there. I think that what you will see is significant growth in the market we're established in. So that's Africa, the Middle East, Australia, China. And China is a good example where we're now building our first large-scale plant. And China is like some other large countries, right? They don't really accept it when you have large plants in other places, except for China itself. So when we have that installed by the end of this year, that in itself will generate a lot of extra demand. So that's these cycles we're looking at the moment. The US, I don't dare to say at the moment.
It's a big market, though. Willem, look, that's come to the end of the Q&A session. We do appreciate your time and your information and being so thorough with it all. Thank you.
Thank you.